Hello, my name is Peggy Seivert. I'm the director of SoLA Contemporary, and I'm happy that you're here. And this is our artist talk for Breaking the Mold, an exhibition curated by Sharon Louise Barnes. And a little bit about SoLA Contemporary. We're located in South Los Angeles. We're a nonprofit organization. Primarily artist run, and we're here to explore what's going on in LA and the world beyond. We're interested in exhibiting art that reflects the current topics and things that are going on in the world culturally. So I would like to introduce you to the moderator, Holly Jerger, and I will share the screen, get a picture up here. Oops. That's not the one we want. There we go. So Holly Jerger is the exhibition's curator at Craft Contemporary. And she's located in Los Angeles. And the mission is to reveal the potential of craft and to educate, captivate, provoke, and empower. With a focus on contemporary art made from craft media and processes, Craft Contemporary presents dynamic exhibitions by established and emerging artists who are often underrepresented in larger art institutions. So Holly will be with us in a little while, and now I would like to introduce you to Sharon Louise Barnes, curator.
Thank you, Peggy. And I also want to thank all of the artists, of course, and Holly Jerger for agreeing to be the moderator for this talk. I want to get into just a little bit about the curator's statement, because this topic has been timely. In 2020, you know, we are in the midst of many changes in the world, and a topic of decolonization of the art world has been a serious topic for consideration during these times of protest. And so this exhibit is responsive to one of those ideas. Breaking the Mold, Decolonizing Abstraction examines American abstract art making in the work of 6 diverse artists who work in a range of materials, visual vocabularies, and compositional systems. Despite their uniquely personal, formal, and conceptual expressions, they share a certain context with one another. It is known that the roots of abstraction predate modernism from Europe, and certainly the New York School as well. Some 20th century art movements not only gained inspiration in, but also borrowed from earlier forms of abstraction found in centuries-old indigenous art from Africa, the Americas, Asia, and Polynesia as a result of colonized conquests. This exhibition presents compelling works by a group of exceptional artists working today who are breaking that institutional mode that resulted from the colonization of abstract art. We are scrolling through some of the images of the exhibit. Peggy, you can go ahead and just scroll through some of those images of the show. It's a group show. And all of the artists contributed to making this, I believe, a very successful and beautiful show. We start here, you'll see an image of Regina Herod. Regina Herod is a painter, sculptor, and multimedia artist. She is a graduate of Otis College of Art and Design with her MFA. And these works represent her sculptural bodies of work. And then we have Mirena Kim. Mirena is a master ceramicist and painter, and she too is a graduate of Otis College of Art and Design with an MFA in Fine Arts. Pete Hoffecker Mejia is currently an artist based in Oregon. And Pete is a sculptor and painter and educator. He's currently a professor at Western Oregon University. And he holds an MFA from Indiana University. Jamal Hassef Talbert is an artist who works in multidisciplines. He earned his MFA from Claremont Graduate University. Mancho 1929, also known by his birth name of Dan Mote Avaro, is a Los Angeles-based painter and public muralist.
Okay.
With that, I want to just start off the conversation. As Holly Jerger was formulating questions for the panel, the first question that we'll get started with before we hand it over to Holly, we'll just start off with the conversation. She noted that the artists were employing many different approaches to abstraction, and we'll open the conversation to have them describe how they use abstraction to address their ideas.
Great. Thank you, Sharon.
When I think of my material use, I think of the tenacity of people, Black and brown people, in the face of so much strife and adversity. They continue to persevere and go forward anyway. And quite often, the way in which they do that is through using, if I'm thinking within the context of makers, they use the resources that they have right around them. And sometimes I've actually been given pause to think about, in a sense, how I am honoring those people that came long before me by my own use of unconventional material in abstracted forms. And I really believe that in some ways, all of these different events and circumstances, all of the layering that has happened in history, that is a cyclical kind of thing. It just comes back, it circles back in just another form, but it's very similar to things that happened before. I'm using material in the same way to do that. And if I think about the other part of the question, I believe that, as to, why I choose abstraction, I believe that it mimics this idea of all of these moving parts, the ugly parts of history and the beauty of it as well, when you think of people and circumstance and going forward anyway. So I'm trying to do that through material.
Okay, great. Thank you, Regina. Would anyone else like to also talk about their responses to the question?
Pete, did you
Sure,
want
I'll
to
go. I can go,
Right.
if that's
Mirena.
okay. Yeah. So that was really interesting, Regina. I love what you said about materials as metaphor. So for me, it's not so much materials, but sort of the line and gesture that I'm very interested in. Even in my ceramic work, I'm always looking for the gestural quality of the piece and how it sits in space, and how is it reaching towards you or retreating, or, you know, kind of sort of a bodily, like even as I describe it, I find myself wanting to engage my hands and my body to try to get the point across. And so, yeah, I'm really kind of searching for how abstraction can express gesture. So, and kind of in the same vein, I worked for many years as a graphic designer, and my specialty, I guess you would say, was typography and logos. And so I really got into kind of the minute expressive capabilities of typography, which is language, and which is also a gesture, if you think about it. The way a certain kind of typeface sits on the page is not that different from how a body sits in space. So those two things kind of combining together, I think really informs my work. And often people would say, oh, it's so graphic. And so I get what they're talking about when they say that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's really about sort of, oh, I would add that because it's gesture and because it's typography, I'm really interested in engaging the viewer on a bodily level, like how the viewer is responding in terms of their body to the piece.
Mhm. Wonderful. Pete, would you like to add in?
Yeah, sure. Because those tie in. One of the things I appreciate about this exhibition is how, even from these different perspectives, all these things do tie in very much with my practice. Our practices have certain similarities. There is an acknowledgement of history, certainly in my work, painterly and sculpture modernist history. This idea of the canon that I'm kind of conflating, mixing with both authentic and insincere kind of indigenous Latin American motif. Because when I was in school in a primarily white institution, I was really attracted to modernism, always had been. My dad collected records and all the old 60s jazz records for a period, had a lot of really nice stuff, nice artwork on them. So I've had that affinity, but in school I really found that the thing that I appreciated most about it was its similarity to woven items I grew up with. So anyway, yeah, I don't want to talk forever. In my practice, I'm basically doing a lot of those same things that Regina was talking about, acknowledging history, but from a sort of a tongue-in-cheek place, if I put it that way. There's no memorialization or authentic kind of display, because colonialism erased that for me. I mean, when I'm making food, I think about, these aren't my recipes, and I don't have access to a lot of those things. So abstraction is important because I don't have access to those things, because the ideas I am grappling with are vague to a certain extent. They're not concrete in that form. So it works as metaphor. And then materially, I use, a lot of materials that are in-betweens. Cardboard that's been peeled away to reveal that kind of interstitial, kind of in-between layer, connecting materials like wood glue as a painting material, things that are about connecting different spaces, because the work is in that middle kind of intersectional area. There's a conversation certainly with craft as well, but I know we're going to have time for all these things. So thank you.
I'll just add a little bit different. I agree with everyone who's already spoken, because all of those things I think about when I'm making my work. But I had been a figurative painter who consciously decided to remove the literal depiction of the body out of my work in favor of abstraction. And I did that to make people slow down. When they look at the work, they can't just, oh, that's, a body, a black body, or they have to slow down and think a little deeper about what they're seeing. It allows me to work in metaphor, hidden symbols, gestures, textures that make people interpret it not only with what they think they're seeing, but how they feel about it, using their intellect, their spirit. It's a different way of seeing. And I want to spark that different way of seeing, because I think if we can get people to see differently rather than through literal summations, that it could possibly help shift. So I call my work social abstraction because I'm making social statements, but they require you to slow down, perceive the work, contemplate, maybe ask questions, and think.
And I think sometimes, or for some people, maybe abstraction perhaps might be a little bit more difficult for them to enter, maybe versus something that is representational. But I think it's really interesting how all of you, in various ways, you're actually seem to be referencing abstraction as, to a certain degree, giving you some freedom. I'm not quite sure if that is right, but that it allows you to break from these colonial histories and maybe modes of representation or ideation, that it allows you to distance yourselves from those systems. It seems, or that seems to be something that you are all maybe referencing to a certain degree. And actually, Jamal, with your work, it seems that you actually sort of combine representational references with abstraction. Can
Yeah.
you, well, maybe that is or isn't correct, and maybe could you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So with my works, I am trying to invoke memory. So when you look at the pieces from the kitchen series, not only is it abstract and it's like shapes and patterns that you can recognize, but also it's objects that everyone's had experiences with. So it's about storytelling, and then people are able to share stories while they're standing with somebody else to share stories about how when they first got their haircut, or their first experience with a hot comb or a pair of scissors or a pair of clippers. The same thing, I mean, I can do the same thing within video art. I had a piece called Milk, where it was a little girl drinking a glass of milk, and then how that invoked the storytelling or the memories jogged. So I'm about invoking memories and sparking conversation with my pieces and bringing that dialogue. So I want to say it kind of like brings people together, even though like Kitchen was definitely named after like African American references, but everyone can relate at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So like I like to tie it in so that everybody can join in the conversation with my abstract pieces.
Right. And maybe too, I might skip around a little bit with our questions, if that's okay with everybody. Some of you started to reference material choices that you were making, and maybe if anyone would like to share more about why they choose to work with the materials that they do and what that means to your work. Like Jamal, I know you, at least from the work I've seen, you use painting, but there's also like gold leaf that is added in. And then I believe you also might use digital processes to a certain degree. So maybe would you mind kind of starting us off?
Yeah, definitely. So with my works, I like to marry new technology and old technology. So I was like born on the cusp of like, you know, cassette players turning into MP3 players. And they just seeing how growing up in an era where I had to learn old and new. So for me, I like to combine the two. So I've learned the process of Photoshop and digital imaging, and I've taught a couple of courses, and like learning how to learning print and learning that I can print on canvas and marry the two of painting and adding those objects to the piece, I think it's unique because you can really, for at least for me, I can really get the point across that I'm trying to make with the art piece. So it's actually, one, it's more cost effective for me because making art is super expensive and I'm like a working artist. So it helps in that process. And then also, I feel like I'm able to do more large scale pieces with the help of digital process. So marrying the two. So for me, gold leaf, I learned about gold leaf. I did a residency back in 2016 in Ghana, or 2015. And while I was there, I know we went to, everybody had on gold, some form of gold. So like gold was a reference, like literally it's called the Golden Coast when you go to Ghana. So just going across the coast and seeing all the different gold and how it reflects against the different colors and patterns that they have there. Most of my ideas derive from that and my visit there. So combining those and seeing, like when you look at the kitchen pieces, like the bright colors in the backgrounds, all of those colors came from my learning about the different colors and artistic practices that they practice there and other patterns that they use there. I incorporate that in my works now, if that makes sense. So that's where the gold comes from. And I like to layer things. So I'll use from joint compound, and just finding dirt, honey. I'll burn and use ashes. Like I've like gone far, like super extreme. So, and I just like to pattern things and seeing, just letting the art pieces take its nature in place as far as like how it lays out and how it turns out when it lays on top of the canvas. So that's like more of my interest in like how I like to layer things out.
Yeah, and again, a real range because, you know, you have gold, which one could consider one of the most precious materials on Earth. And then you said you're mixing it even with like joint compound or dirt, or pulling from this range, the digital and the handmade, which is really interesting. And I think oftentimes too, like even just the history of gold itself, and the extraction of people and resources through slavery and colonialism, that, you know, it is one of the sort of founding materials in that quest of the Western world.
Definitely.
Would anybody else like to talk more specifically about the materials that you use?
Sure. I stick with the same materials most of the time, and I'm really interested in how they work together in service to my exploration of, you know, strength, fragility. But when I think of, for example, wood, I'm very drawn to organic material in particular. And one of the reasons I'm drawn to found wood or pods or roots is I love this connection as tied to the earth. And I tend to think of humanity, we are tied to the earth as well. And several years ago, I was really thinking about how, in particular, trees hold memory. You know, they see everything, they are the witnesses. And so this idea of using bark or something connected to a structure that in some ways is very strong, but holds this memory and sort of, but can be very fragile, and juxtaposing that to power structures. You know, the steel definitely represents the struggle, the power, the dominant strength, but yet, as I think I said before, we, as horrible as it is to say, we really can't, in this world, we can't have one without the other. We have the dominance, we have the strength, we have the fragility and the tenacity. And I don't know if anyone notices, but I tend to embed the seemingly weakest properties inside of the steel, you know, because it's all of this swirl that works together in this system that we are in. And the system, as I see it, it's all connected to this investigation of how the world works in terms of marginalizations and contradictions of who gets, who doesn't, resources and how it all cycles back, everything I was saying before. So for me, those two materials, paper, definitely that's the malleable part of things that, you know, I don't know. Paper to me represents the literacy or the rhetoric of everything that I write about, even before I go into the work itself. And the wax, oddly enough, it also holds history, but I like it because you can layer it, but I also see it as something that smothers. So if we conceive of these different circumstances through history as layered and repeating, I don't know, wax to me, it's something that smothers, hides, conceals, and it's very malleable. And a lot of these situations are the same. So that's really why I use those materials in particular. So in a nutshell, there's more I could say, but you know, that's.
Well, feel free, or maybe
No. But I just,
okay.
you know, yeah.
Sure. And with your pieces in the exhibition, it was very much like I couldn't tell like where one material ended and where another began. I mean, it seemed like everything was very much fused together, or and I think even perhaps maybe like with the metal that you use, since oftentimes it is found, a lot of times it took me a long time to even identify kind of what that material was. And it seems like for you, it's very much about the, like you said, the layering or sort of the conglomeration of these materials versus any one of those particular materials.
Absolutely. And that really does tie to this idea of how the world works. You know what I mean? Like when I think of, in particular, I was thinking the other day about the piece, Assault of the Motherland, the sort of cactus piece that sort of folds, that's against the wall. And I was thinking about this idea of colonization and how so many, it continues today in new forms, but you have different nations, they go, the British, the Spanish, whatever it is, they go to areas that are rich in resources and they strip the land, they take all of the wealth. And yet the people are left with the straggles and just what remains. And they keep going on anyway. So when I made that piece, I was really thinking about the idea of just taking, and what is left behind. And quite often when I even approach looking at how I want to conflate these particular materials that I've described, I think about how they speak to this idea of what they represent in this whole pool, you know, this whole oppressive pool, tenacity pool, you know, just the way things go round and round. You know, right now we could talk about neo-colonialism and how different countries are going into these same places. And even if there's progress that's been made, of course, it comes right back to who is marginalized, who's left out, who has wealth, who gets paid. So I think of material that way.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you speak about the representational, because with my views on materials, I'm always thinking about the referential in terms of, it seems like, especially these days, everything is sort of a meme for something else and everything refers back to, and there's a real bouncing around of these references. And so working in ceramics has been one of those areas where it really has a strong meaning for a lot of people. You know, it's, for some it's commercial, for some it's quote unquote primitive, for some it's you know, esoteric, for some, you know, it seems to have its own kind of referencing power and its own momentum and what it means to people. And so in some ways, I've found myself almost working against my material with ceramics because it's so completely easy to pigeonhole what ceramics is. And so, yeah, I found myself, especially with that sculptural piece, that was a real breakthrough for me because in approaching the clay, it was a real kind of eye-opening or mind-opening experience to realize that I don't have to take that clay and fire it all the way to the completed, the quote-unquote completed stage, as I had been trained to do for years being a ceramicist. So to leave the clay partially finished was something that was almost symbolic of kind of a new attention to materials in a way.
Yeah, and as someone who also lives in the realm of craft as well, yeah, I think craft, it's a bit of perhaps almost a double bind because people, these materials, clay, textiles, that sort of form the foundation of craft. You know, people do oftentimes have very intimate relationships with them, you know, just through their domestic life, whether they maybe realize it or not. But at the same time, it's like it can carry a lot of baggage, so to speak, or maybe weight that you don't necessarily want it to. And I know, Pete, you also referenced craft in the development of your work. Could you maybe speak a little bit more to that and also how that plays into these larger ideas we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So I reference craft in several ways. In obviously the way things are put together, and that, you know, that sort of definition. But and even in that there is a variation or you know, different levels. It's not, you know, all built to some exacting kind of specifications. There are areas that are worked very precisely, where, you know, joints are very nice and tight and things are happening. And then there's other areas where things are happening at a kind of, you know, more casual kind of speed, you know, or and less exacting, which tends to me to read faster, to give it an immediacy, and to throw that word out that's been used before, a kind of stronger gestural quality than if things were very kind of measured and equilateral throughout the composition. So there's that, but then there's also, as we were just talking about, the contrast in materials. So there are very, what, you know, some would consider low materials, and then, you know, things like steel, although in the works that are at SoLA, steel is only used as the arm that holds the plexiglass. So it's really kind of a, I very much hesitate to use the word finesse, because if you looked at those welds, you'd be like, eh. But it is a very small and kind of, you know, understated in that instance. But the plexiglass is laser cut. It has that kind of really sharp, kind of glowing edge. And I feel like, much like how was previously said, I believe Jamal was saying, these contrasts, you know, I like that there is that kind of contrast between the, well, not that modern, but, you know, somewhat modern aspect of plexiglass and the process of laser cutting it to get that nice edge. And then something like a dust mop that is acting like Latin American textiles, or, you know, a lot of found wood. Regina's talk about organic materials resonates with me as well. The materials, I very often start with something, you know, a weathered piece of, you know, it's usually like walks and things like that. And then a sketch, or the, you know, kind of depending on how things work. But craft is part of the meaning as well, because, you know, it's not just employed for creating different areas of density and kind of contrast, but also because there is that, you know, this is kind of mentioning before, this idea of the canon as being this, you know, like there are artists you have to know, there are artists that are important for, that everyone supposedly has to know. And I personally feel like we need to be in a place where we're making our own canon. I do think that the art history can be non-hierarchical, multipolar, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I think it ties into the use of materials in that, I normally eschew, although that might be changing, really, high art things like, steel or bronze or whatnot. But in favor of, the vernacular, the accessible, the things that people have a relationship. And there's a lot of similarities in the conversations everybody was having that, it's startling to me how many similarities in the ways we're approaching things, layering, these using objects as a foundational aspect of abstraction. I think Jamal and my work has some similarities in that, he's using this object is as a both as its physical, meaning, and then also just as form and, for its formal characteristics too. So.
Right, I would just add, I think a lot of us are using materials as metaphor in often, and I call it in my work a poetic materiality, because I'm changing a lot of materials that are found or repurposed. And I did a painting that had liquor store bags in it, and I did a painting that had charred wood in it, and all those we're creating certain metaphors for other statements, because my process itself, to me, is a metaphor for the Black experience. All of the piling on, the stripping away, the weaving into, the rebuilding. So as I'm layering these things on, I'm thinking about this embeddedness and this displacement, and all of these things that are metaphors to me for the Black experience, but in the end result, that there is a rebuilding in it, and there is a beauty in it that resolves all of these things, and yet the marks of all of that are still in it.
And I think even like with this reference to using a broad range of materials too, when we're speaking of the Western canon of abstraction in the United States, that really is focused on painting, focused on sculpture for the most part, as well as focusing on mostly white artists as well. So it seems like even just, and male, definitely. And just by, even just sort of breaking from those media it seems like you're all messing around with them, in various ways as a form of starting to kind of deconstruct that, or Sharon, break that canon, break that history apart. I actually wanted to, Anita had a question. Actually, before I get to Anita's question, I did want to make sure, is Mancho on, or I don't think, okay, so Mancho wasn't able to join us. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that he wasn't being left out of the conversation. But Anita had a question for everybody, or two. Is decolonization embedded in the abstraction itself or in the artist intention? And I think you all have maybe been referencing that to a certain degree, but would anyone like to address that very specifically?
Could you read that question one more time, Holly?
Sure, and it's actually two questions. First question is, or I guess they're together. Is decolonization embedded in the abstraction itself or in the artist intention?
I think for me, definitely in the object itself, in a sense, because in some sense, not consciously, I am challenging this notion of what abstraction is and what it can be. I mean, there are many people who would look at some of the materials I use and say, what is that? That's not really abstraction. Maybe they wouldn't say it to your face, but they would look at these humble materials and think, well, it isn't bronze. It's not, it's not plaster exclusively. You're messing around, as you said, Holly, with all of these different things. So in the endeavor to interrogate the connections between past, present, right now, I am acting subversively in a way, I'm acting, I'm reacting rather to what I have learned within white institutions, and what they say that abstraction has to be. It could be anything we want it to be, but I'm also returning to some of these non-precious materials that have been used for centuries, really, and I look at the original intent of the object that I'm using, whether that's wood. I'm looking at how I see it in terms of holding meaning, as I described with wood, and I'm challenging the notion of, what it can be. And when I really think about it, I think about all of the male white artists throughout history who would call African art or Native American art primitive. And really it wasn't primitive. And then in another stroke, immediately commodify aspects and ideas from that work to their own end. So I'm subconsciously thinking of all of those things and bringing it right back to my work. And I'm not doing anything somebody wasn't doing years and years ago. I'm just doing it in a different way and conflating these materials in ways that I think serve my agenda and what I'm trying to say. So,
I really, it's Annetta, by the way.
Yes.
She's my beloved ex-professor and mentor and current mentor, Annetta Capone. Thanks for that question, Annetta.
Can we add and friend?
Oh
yes, absolutely.
And friend Annetta. I just think that's such an awesome question for me, because I feel like, as somebody who has the last name Kim, I feel like as soon as somebody sees my name connected to my work, they immediately go to intention, because the racial and ethnic and nationality part, the recognizability of my name and what my name means in today's society, I feel like becomes immediately a part of the conversation, whether I like it or not. And I've often fantasized how it would be if my name was John Smith, or just J Smith or something like that. Like, my name is it makes people think they know what they're looking at when they look at my work. And so I feel like I can't escape intention. I would like for my work to be seen purely on its own merits. But I fear that it's not happening just yet. I think things are turning around. Or moving forward. I think things are definitely changing for the better in that respect, especially as it pertains to Asian Americans or Korean Americans. But just as we struggle to not always, have to play a certain role on a TV show or in a play or in a movie, I feel that struggle to not always have to play a certain role as a female Korean artist working in abstraction. Does that answer the question at all in any way?
Mirena, I think being seen on one's own merits will always be a part of this conversation, because that's what we all want. It's what we want as people as well as artists. And because of these other constructs that are at play, that makes it difficult. And
but Sharon, is it a real history? Is it a real actual history? Is it my actual history? Or is it a history that the viewer thinks they understand just by looking at my
Exactly.
name or
Right.
your face or, you know, somebody else's? Yeah.
Right.
And that's the whole point, is that we have difficult, all of us in this room have difficulty with being seen on our own merits. It's a challenge that somehow certainly in this country, it's a difficulty that we have to maneuver always. And as much as we would like to, see a day when that's not in existence anymore, it's something we're all having to work toward. And yeah, we would all like to work freely without that context hanging over us all the time. Some people go with it by choice. Many of us just go with it. And other of us would like to just free ourselves of it. So, I really hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and I connect, Mirena, I can connect to specifically what you're saying in terms of your name. And I would align that idea of someone hearing your name and thinking, oh, well, I know what she's all about. It's going to be da 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 da. But that also happens to, I mean, all artists of color. I'm listening to what both of you are saying. And I think that it's such a tired, exhausting reality, this idea of either that, like, oh, well, Mirena has the last name Kim, so she must be this way. Or if you're a Black artist, this idea of, oh, well, you should be working this way. And if you're not working that way, it's like, well, you're not really making this kind of art. You should be making that kind of art. Or you have the third thing of being relegated to only doing one kind of thing because of our heritage and our color, so it's all in that strange, horrific thing. I don't know how to say it, but it never ends, and it's so exhausting. And one day I'd love white male artists to spend a week in our shoes within the context of art and practice.
Right.
Anyway,
That the art they make has nothing to do with their personal identity.
no, maybe, I'm sure, but
because
Well,
they're
it is a
free of that,
luxury.
but nobody else is,
Yeah.
right.
It's certainly a luxury to be that far removed, to have the ability to be that far removed from self in
Yes.
practice.
Yes.
Whereas, and to that question, which is, I think, really strong and really loaded, I think the word and decolonization itself is pretty problematic, only because of the changes that has kind of gone through in the past, really seems like a decade, but I don't know. And so, that used to refer always and automatically to land rights. Decolonization meant get out, land back. Now it's kind of turned into a catch-all to, talk about the themes that we are talking about, which is really important. And language, very often adapts to what it needs to do. The only, the issue, and there's a really great essay that I'd just be remiss not to mention. The only issue is that has the potential to draw away from the initial impulse of sovereignty and land rights. But so I have my own kind of things about that, and so that term is super loaded because I'm not giving anyone's land back through my art. I wish I could. But in terms of addressing those issues, and in terms of talking about name, that's really relevant. I used to think I should just make my name my artist statement, because it is this conflation of cultures. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, to indigenous parents, Muisca and Embera background, but raised by a multiracial Caucasian parents, family. So there's always this kind of idea of trying to find yourself. And is decolonization in the art, or the artist's intention? It is my intention to bring these things, and our intentions, I think, to bring these things to light. But also to and to kind of supersede, or try to you know, the confines that we all, you know, are acknowledging that we feel that we've been put in. So the intention and the work hopefully are doing that. But, and then this is my last little, you know, pithy whatever, is that you know, the world we're in needs a lot of help, right? And I love art so much, it drives me crazy, but I am wrestling very hard right now with the impact, and it's, you know, probably not even fair in me to bring up something like this at the very end, but the impact that it is relevant to that question, the impact that arts have. So I think any artist who would really like to see these things happen can make their practice a space for that, because I also think of my practice as a third space, as a space of kind of, you know, anti-colonial space, if you will. But it's also behooved, you know, it's also on us that want these changes, you know, to physically do things other than, you know, because abstraction is difficult. This is a time when I feel like we're talking in whispers when we should be screaming, because abstraction is, or at least the way I employ it, fairly subtle, I think. So anyway, that it's a heavy question and a one that will probably haunt me. So thank you for that.
So many artists are grappling with that, though. I can't tell
Yeah.
you how many conversations I've had with artists with exactly what you're saying, Pete.
Oh, yeah.
And the art organizations that show
Yes.
your work too.
Yes.
Mhm.
I also wanted to circle back to Jamal. Jamal, did you want to add anything or talk about something else? Or you haven't spoken for a while?
I think he said he had to leave at 6.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But he may have logged off already.
Okay. Well, please thank him for
Oh,
being here
absolutely.
today.
I will be thanking these people for a while.
Right. Well, it is 6 o'clock. How tight are we on time? Do we have time for the artists to share any closing thoughts?
I think we have a time to do that. I think Peggy will allow us to.
Okay. This has been a really fantastic conversation, and I think just the depth of your work again has really provided the platform. The depth of this conversation is because of the depth of the work that you are all doing. Before we do depart, does anybody want to share any other last comments or thoughts?
Well, I hope that this exhibition, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and I'm anxious for these conversations to grow larger, actually. So, you know, that's all I want to say, but it's overdue, as Pete was saying. And this,
I just want to
especially
hang out
now.
with everyone in person.
Yeah,
I want to hang
yeah.
out with you guys in person. That's
Yeah.
that's my closing comment. I just
Careful
hate that we
what you
I
can't.
love that.
Look,
Yes,
Be
yes.
careful what you ask for, Mirena. We'll all be over.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, Regina, let's
Yes,
talk, you know?
yes. We will. We will.
Okay. All right.
I just want to say, as the person who was honored to choose all of you, how rewarding it was for me to see all of your works together, because it had, the conversation was so present. Everything you're saying when I looked at it was present. And I think that's a testimony to each of your expressions, your aesthetics, your politics, all of the things that make you you. Just had a beautiful conversation in that gallery, and I can't tell you how proud I am that all of you were there.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Yes.
Really like this feeling of community because it is
Yes.
not always present.
That's right.
So that's great.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree, Pete.
I think, Sharon, that you have many more exhibitions, or this is maybe the start of many to come, or could be a really fantastic series. If you want to branch your work in that way.
Yeah. Wow.
I think I said that to you too, Sharon. You really are onto something here. Holly, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And no, thanks to all of you. And I really appreciated, again, being able to see your work. And I think I had known of a couple of you, but not everybody. So just really being able to be introduced to everyone's work and get a chance to learn a little bit more about it. And again, I really, it's amazing, I think, what you all addressed in the hour that we had together. And no, thank you for just the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. I knew that you would be the perfect person, and you have been. I really thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Oh, my
Yeah.
pleasure. Again, it all comes from all of your work.
Okay, did anyone else want to pose a question who's in the audience?
I know it looks like Jean had a lot of questions.
Maybe we
Jeannie
have
does.
time for just one more question, or unless you guys are talked out.
Why not?
I'm trying to go back through them, which might take me a little bit of time. Oh, hold on. You're getting thank yous. Well, maybe if someone in the audience doesn't have a question, perhaps I could pose one more. I was curious just because Sharon said,
Join audio. Once you have to tap on the screen and you'll get a little fire.
Sorry, does someone in the audience have a question for the artist?
It's here.
Okay. I was curious if you all you were all mentioning how you this is a great beginning to a conversation and being able to come together more to talk about it. Do you have other artists or other artist communities or groups that you can discuss these ideas with, or do you feel kind of isolated with the work that you do, or how do you reach out to other artist communities?
I'll just jump in real quick with that. There's a this is my conversations with other Black women who work in abstraction is kind of what sparked my my thoughts about this exhibit, because we had been talking among ourselves, and then Lisa Diane Witchworth brought us together for a talk a few months ago, and we were thinking about how Black women who work in abstraction are odd, and why we're odd, why people look at us as odd, and what makes us do what we do, and what histories are in play, you know, all of that. And as I thought more about that, the idea for this exhibit came into play, because I realized not only do Black women who work in abstraction realize that they're sometimes the odd man out, that a lot of people feel that way. And mainly because of the dominant perspective that has shaped how people think of abstraction and who should be making it and who should not. So I have community, and I'm grateful for that community, because you can feel like, well, why am I making abstract art when everybody else is making money hand over fist doing figuration? You know, why? So, and it's because you feel motivated to do you.
Yeah.
And you're going to do it no matter what. You're going to express yourself. You're going to declare yourself a free human being and express yourself the way you want to. And whatever else motivates you to be an abstract artist, it first starts with deciding you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and that's a decision, because there's so many other forms of art you can make. So as we consider what kind of art we want to make, we realize that there are, as Peter will always say, cultural hierarchies, politics of abstraction at play.
Right.
They're there, and you decide to make it anyway.
That's right. Absolutely. I feel being in Los Angeles can be isolating in and of itself. And even though I have many pangs of feeling like I'm just doing my thing in this bubble, I have met a lot of very interesting people in the city. And I hesitate to call myself purely an abstract artist because I also create figurative works with abstraction embedded within it, even if it's not always perceived that way. And I really feel like a lot of the conversations I've had with people in this town have generated a thought process that does contribute to my work. And I think of some of the abstract sculptors that I've gravitated toward before, and there are too many to name, but it's an interesting brokerage. You know, I have some community that is growing, and then some of it is aligned with what Sharon said about just making a decision to do it no matter what you have. So, yes.
And Mirena or Pete, anything else you'd like to add?
What was the question?
Oh,
Or the
just if you sort of have a community of artists who work within abstraction and the themes that you're dealing with that you can talk to or sort of be a part of.
Well, my practice is, you know, I don't think I say this often at all because it sounds kind of weird, but it is a little bit, part of the function is a beacon to gather, hopefully, community and have these conversations. I grew up in the Southeast, adoptee, so, you know, there's this kind of feelings of isolation anyway. And then recently moving here, you know, I just moved to Oregon a year ago, and then with Corona and everything, it feels like I just moved here because I haven't gone out, and so you know, I do feel quite isolated, but in all instances, if possible, if I'm able to shake it off and think clearly, you know, I like to try to turn those things into an asset, and so. You know, you have a lot of space, too much maybe for a lot of navel gazing and all that, but it creates a space for you to establish and work out your business before you go kind of interacting with that. You know, so I've had a lot of times to sort of get this together. I should definitely, you know, like cross my fingers or something. I said that to a certain extent. And so it's really important to me. At first it was, you know, community, just finding, that's why the idea of the canon was so repulsive to me, because it was not my community. And then I really got very excited about the kind of the way modernism was interpreted and took off in Latin America and Central America. And that felt a lot more like my community, like Helio Oiticica. And so there was this initially an academic community, which was kind of me finding my, you know, people having the conversations that I was interested in continuing. And then now I think I'm at that crux where it's, you know, important to turn this into, you know, an actual living, communicating, thriving community rather than just an academic virtual community. So I do see that as a part of the work. You know, I think my art is there to make me a psychologically whole person, you know, so I do, or at least partially. So I think that is one aspect of its function, hopefully.
You know,
that's why I'm all gushy and, you know, cheesy about being in a show with, you know, like-minded artists.
Yeah, I mean, we find community sometimes, you know, I mean, I found Pete because we were both on residency at Oxbow in Michigan. And there was a community there. You could feel the community there. And when I was thinking about a show, I started drawing upon the artists. And I know a lot of artists who express themselves in many different ways. But I think community starts finding you. And, you know, I think we've developed a little community right here just among the artists in the show.
Definitely,
I think,
absolutely.
you know, you bond with people who understand you. But yeah, community is important. And I think even though we work in isolation as artists, and it's our tendency to do that, that when we find community, it's helpful to us. So yeah.
I think you even bring up an interesting point about exhibitions. I don't know if folks who maybe work outside of the art world always, and maybe for folks who do work inside it, like that so much of what everyone is doing, whether you're making work and showing it, or someone like me who works at an institution that works with artists and shows their work, that it is really ultimately about the relationships that we make, and that, you know, so much extends beyond the work itself that's on display. So just adding that into the fold.
Thank you.
Right, well, great. Was there anyone else who had a question, or again, would any of the artists like to say anything else before we sign off?
It's been great.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sharon.
Thank
Yeah, and we are looking forward to your next exhibition, Sharon.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there any cars out there? We need to
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank
Holly.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you, Holly,
Holly.
for doing this.
Thank all of you.
Bye.
It's been great.
Thank you. And thank you, audience members, too, for joining
Thank you
in.
for joining us so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye.